Hi friends, welcome back. This is lesson 3 of our special project based on Winslow Homer called Peaceful Sea. So I hope you've watched lesson 1 and lesson 2 and you're ready now to move on to do some more of our mixed media project. Now the last time that we were together we worked on some textural elements and I'm excited to brush off our salt and pull up our plastic bag. But let me review first what you need for this lesson, lesson 3. You're going to need your painting so far, a pan of watercolor, either 8 or 16 pans, an assortment of brushes, large, medium, and small, a few paper plates that we're going to use as palettes. You're going to need a bowl of water, and you'll need a separate cup of water, and some paper towels for cleaning off your brushes. Now remember, you should always be working on a protected surface. So if you had to move your painting last time to somewhere else to dry, bring it back and gently masking tape it onto some newspaper or a vinyl tablecloth, something like that, so that you're protecting where you're going to work. Okay, so the last time we were together, do you remember we tried some new techniques? We put salt into our sand to show some texture, and we put our plastic bag that was smashed up onto our rock in order to make some texture. So I'm excited to see what happened there. So while you have your painting right here, very gently brush off your salt. Now since your painting is already taped down, you're going to have to brush off the edges. And you're not going to do this very rough. You're going to be nice and gentle and push all the salt off onto the sides. Look at that great snowflaking type texture so that we have the sandy beach. Isn't that fun? Great, and I'm being very careful. Salt is a corrosive element, and so if it stays onto the paper, eventually it'll eat away at it. So you have to make sure you get all the salt off. Great. Now I'm ready to pull up the plastic bag. Oh, and you can see that unique texture I got from the impression of the wrinkles in the plastic bag to give me my ragged rock. Isn't that fun? Terrific. Well, before we move on to the next part of our painting, I want to talk to you about some qualities of water because we're going to be working on the lake today and putting in some more details that really make it look like a lake. And now that this is all dry, we can do that. So take a look at this painting by Winslow Homer called Boy Fishing. Now most people think of water as blue, but water is actually clear. And so water has a lot of properties that we need to understand. So if you look at Boy Fishing, you'll see that it's very reflective. There's sky, clouds, shadow. Even though water is clear, you're going to see a lot of colors when you look at water depending on what it is. For example, have you ever put your face over a pond and you've seen your own reflection? That reflective quality of water is really important to remember when we're doing our project. So for example, we're going to see a reflection of the sails from our sailboat. If you look back at Boy Fishing, you'll see a reflection of that boat into the water. It'll reflect some trees that are on the bank of the river. And so that will cause the water to look dark. So the reflective quality of water is really important. We're going to see a reflection of the sail, but we're also going to be reflecting some blue from the sky. And that's why most people think of water as blue, even though it's clear. See this water in this glass? That's the second quality of water we have to be mindful of. It's transparent. You can see through it. So it really doesn't have any color. So if you look at this painting by Winslow Homer, this is called The Sponge Diver from 1899. Can you see that diver's left elbow and a portion of his brown body into the water? You can't see really far or really deep. There's not enough light. But you can see some of the body, some of the elbow, and in the case of a boat, some of a boat in the first portion of the lake. So that transparent quality of water and the reflective quality of water is very important to remember when we do our lake. Now there's a third quality to water that we have to remember, and that's water is a liquid, which means it doesn't stay still. It moves. Now, an ocean, of course, has waves that move in and out. Have you ever been to the ocean and watched the waves move in and out? Or a river. That's where water flows in one direction. Or a lake. Even though a lake, you think of it as being still, there's wind, and that causes water to move. Or there's activity on the lake, say a boat going by, and that will cause ripples to go on the water. So we look at the reflective nature of water, the transparency of water, and the moving of water because it's liquid, and that all impacts how we're going to paint our lake. In order to show movement, you make different kinds of strokes in the water. So let's go back and look at the sponge diver again. You'll see all the little strokes that Homer used to show the movement in that ocean. This is when Winslow Homer was down in the Caribbean, and that kind of water was so different from the ocean that he saw off the coast of Maine or Massachusetts. The water seemed bluer and fresher and deeper, and you can really see that in this painting as he shows those waves up against that diver and the boat. Now, we're going to have sailboats on our sea, and it's not going to be as choppy as that water in the ocean. This is a lake, but we will have movement. There must be wind, we have sailboats, and that's going to impact how the water looks. So to get started with our water, we need to set up our palette, and we're going to use our 3 cool colors. So take your water and make 3 small puddles, like the size of a quarter, not very large, on the same plate, but small, like that, for our 3 cool colors. And using my medium brush, I'm going to load the same blue that we used for the wash. So remember, when we load a brush, we twirl it on its side. We're very gentle with the bristles. And I'm rolling it side to side to side. And I go back into a puddle. Now, I want this to be a little bit more intense, so I'm going to go back and load it a second time from the pan. You can see how that paint's just going right on there. Perfect. I want to get my other colors ready. So now that I've dipped my brush, now I'm going to choose a purplish color. Load my brush. Purple, of course, is another cool color. And I'll make a purple puddle. Not intense enough for me. We don't want it to be as pale as our wash. We want it to be a more medium tone. So I'll load my brush again. Now, friends, if you have an 8-pan watercolor set, the other cool color you will use will be green. But I happen to have a 16-pan watercolor set, so I'm going to use a darker shade of blue. So if you have a 16-pan set, do the same thing. Use a darker shade of blue as my other cool color. Roll it twice. There we go. So now I'm ready to work on my lake. I want to use shorter strokes that are not perfectly straight, kind of ripply, and they're going to go horizontally. This body of water is horizontal, and so that's how wind would move across the water, and so that's how I'm going to make my strokes. Also, I want to make sure that it stays light in the distance. We learned last time we were together that one of the rules of aerial perspective is that objects that are in the distance appear smaller. Well, one of the other rules is that colors in the distance appear lighter. And so we're going to keep our lake fairly light, the same wash, and so we're only going to start to build our strokes in the middle ground, right about this, at the height of the large boat. So I'm going to go back to my original blue that I used for the wash, and using small strokes at about a medium, I'm just going to feather in some light horizontal strokes, and you'll notice I'm leaving some gaps, and that's what I want you to do. Leave some gaps. They should not all connect. I'm not pressing very hard, my friends. I'm using just kind of the tip of my medium-sized brush, and I'm working fairly quickly. Now you want to avoid the boat, and you definitely want to avoid the sail. And I'm going to take this all the way, the same one color, horizontal strokes. I'm not worried about keeping them straight or even. But I'm not going to go right up to the sand. I'm going to leave this light right against the sand as well. When water gets very thin, like when it's coming up onto the beach, when it's very thin, it's totally transparent, so you can see right through to the sand underneath. So you wouldn't see this ripple effect. You really only see this when the water is deep, and that's why I'm leaving this nice and light by the sand. You've probably seen that if you've ever been up to a beach or at a lakeside. You can stand right on the water's edge with your feet in there, and you can see your feet perfectly, right? Because it's clear, because it's such a thin layer. Okay, now that I've done that first color, that's the same blue I used for my wash. I'm going to rinse out my brush, check on my paper towel that it's clean, and now I'm going to go into my purple. And I'm going to do the same thing. You know what, that purple seems a little pale to me, so I want to make it a medium tone. If you discover that your puddle is a little too thin or too pale, you can reload and add some more. You just don't want it right from the pan. That's too dark. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to do the same thing, thin strokes, overlapping right where we just were. I'm not going to go over the boat or over the sail. I'm leaving some gaps in between. And I'm coming close to the sand, but I'm really not going right up against it. Like that. We're not finished yet. Now we're ready to add in our third cool color. So mine is this darker blue. I see that these two blues are very similar. I want to make this a darker shade of blue. So over here I have this third blue. I'm going to add to that. I'm going to roll. Now you as the artist will be making choices the whole time that you're painting. You're going to decide how thick you want your lines, how dark you want your lines, even color choices like I'm doing here. And that's what will make your painting different from your neighbors if you're doing this project with anyone else. I would love to see your work too. Now with this third color, I'm going to dip in and I'm going to do the same thing. Small strokes, overlapping, running horizontally, and I'm not going to go over the hull of the boat or the sail, and I'm not going to get too close to the sand. Now back here, as you get to the horizon line, it's going to stay light, so I can put just some light, very light. Now this is our medium tone, but we know that as colors move forward, they get darker. It's more intense color. Take a look at this painting by Winslow Homer. This is called Burnt Mountain. I love this one. This is where you can really see in this seascape that the color of the water is much lighter in the distance. Look at how as it comes forward in the frame, how the color gets much more intense and darker. So we want to keep our lines loose and ripply, but we know it's going to get darker as it comes closer to us. So we're ready to add in another layer of color. You're still going to use the medium brush, but we're not going to go back to our puddles. We're going to go right to our pan. And so we're going to start with our first blue, and I'm only going to use the tip of the brush, and you can see how this is much more intense color right from the pan. A few strokes, leaving lots of space in between. If your brush gets too dry, dip it in the water. And I'm going to actually be careful to put more strokes as it comes closer. So in other words, they're going to be maybe a little bit closer together or overlap a little bit more. Now I'll move to the second color, which was my purple. Again, I'm staying light with the way I'm holding the brush. You can see how my brush is more up and down rather than the way it would be if it was holding a pencil. If it dries out too much, just dip it in. Don't worry if some of your strokes get too thick. That's okay. I'm going to press just a little harder here as I get up front. I want my strokes to be a little darker. I'm avoiding the hull of that boat. And now the last color. I have this deeper blue. As you press down on the brush, the bristles spread out a little more. So if you keep your brush very light, it'll be a thin stroke. If you press down a little more, it's a wider stroke. So you do what looks good to you. You're going to try and make your stroke so it's darker as it comes forward, but not right up to the sand line, because that water is clear. Now, here's our last step, my friends. Clean that brush. Check it on your paper towel so it's clear. Now get a larger brush. And what we're going to do is dip it right in clear water, no paint. And we're going to use this to soften these lines by running the brush over all of these strokes so they blend in together. Can you see that? Just clear water. And it blends that all together. Nice and light right up against the sand because water's transparent. Light in the distance because colors get lighter as they recede. That's a part of aerial perspective. Now, we have another quality of the water that we're going to work with a little bit more when we use our chalk pastel, because water glistens in sunlight, and so we're going to add in some highlights with the chalk pastel at the end, that as part of our mixed media project. But it's so important, my friends, to remember about the three natures of water that we have to be mindful of when you paint a seascape. And Homer was a master at it. And that's that water is reflective. That's why we left the gap for our sail. And that water is transparent, right? That you really can see through it. And that water moves. And so it's not flat and solid. So there's a lot of movement and different strokes you would add in your surface. When I think about reflective, it reminds me of when I was little. I used to love to go at a local lake that our family would go to and look at my reflection in the water. And there'd be boats pulling water skiers behind, and I would get so excited. I would count to see how long it took for the ripples from that boat to reach me at the shore and distort my image in the lake. I love how you can look into water and it's like a mirror. You know, there's a lot of verses in Scripture that talk about the reflective nature of water. I want to read one to you now. It's in the book of Proverbs. That's one of my favorites. Proverbs 27, verse 19. As water reflects the face, so one's life reflects the heart. Wow. So water reflects us accurately. You look in, it's like looking into a mirror. So the way you live reflects what's going in your heart. Do you say that you love people? Then the way you live your life should show that you're kind and respectful and you're not selfish. Of course, God sees into the heart all the time perfectly. But I want my life to reflect something that would be pleasing to God. I hope you are the same way. So after we have let this dry for a while, of course we have to be very careful because we know that wet on wet will not work. It'll just bleed all over. So before we can do the details of our sails, we have to let the lake dry. But we have one more technique that we want to do to finish up to distinguish between the lake and the sky. This is a lake, which means it has another side to it, although it's a rather large lake. So we want to show that this is not an ocean, but a lake. And so we know that there's probably some trees on the other side of that lake that we can see. But aerial perspective tells us we wouldn't see actual trees. We would see something that suggests trees. Take a look at this painting that we have in the studio of Winslow Homer. This is a harbor, and so that has another side. And you can see Homer put in here some land on the other side. Not a lot of detail. You don't know if there's houses or people or anything, but you see this land over here, and it's not detailed, but it's a solid mass of a different color that separates the sky from the water. Well, we're going to do the same type of thing. So let's get a clean paper plate, pour a very small puddle of water, like the size of a quarter, like so. And using our medium brush, let's just make sure it's clean. There we go. Our medium brush, we're going to dip into a dark green. And load your brush by rolling on its side, around and around and around. And go to the puddle. Now we're not going to stay with a straight green. Colors in the distance are also duller. So we don't want this to look too bright. So after I've loaded some green, I want to load some brown to make it duller. So on your pan, get a little bit of brown, roll that around. I think I need that to be a little more intense. Now we learned when we did our wash that the more water you have in the paint, the more light and translucent the color is. And so if you want it to be a more medium tone, you have to have less water. So I poured a lot of water there, so I have to add more pigment. There we go. So when it's a dull green-brown color, my friends, then we're ready to go. You're going to use your medium brush, and I want you to watch me first before you try it. This is called scumbling, and we're kind of making small, circular, jagged motions with the brush all the way across that horizon line that we had penciled in lesson 1. And this will suggest trees in the distance. So you're not really trying to draw trees. Okay? So you should find that small, fine pencil line that we did, and you're simply going to, see, I don't think that's intense enough, so I'm going to push some water over here, and I'm just going to make a more intense puddle. But I don't want to work straight from the pan because that would be too dark. There we go. Yes, I think that will work. So now I'm going to go along this line, but I'm very jagged. You see how jagged? I'm just kind of, and I'm not going to go through the sail. Make sure you keep the sail white. I'm kind of bouncing my brush around along that line. Some is a little taller than the other. Right up into that sky, right along that line. So I'm simply suggesting trees on the other side as I bounce around. Be careful with that sail. So some is a little bigger. There's another sail, so I want to skip over that. And I'm going to go all the way across. Do you see that? Now, some of the watercolor will pool in some lower spots, and that's perfectly fine because that creates different values, some darker values, and that's exactly how it would be if you looked across at trees. Some would be in shadow. So this fact that water is liquid and runs in puddles works out great for this. Darken that up a little bit. Great. Well, that is wet and our lake is wet, so we have to stop right there. We can't go any further because things will start to run together. So let your painting stay nice and flat where it is if possible. If not, carry it flat like a tray of food to somewhere where it can dry undisturbed. And you'll want to clean off your brushes, rinse. Running water is always best, but if not, rinse a few times. Check on the paper towel to make sure it runs clear, and use your hands to take your brush back to a nice point. There we go. Now friends, you never want to, when you go to clean a brush, you never want to jab it down into water and press the bristles down flat, that really ruins the brush. You want to be very gentle with your paintbrushes, and they'll last a long time. And you never want to store brushes in a can or a jar with the bristles down where they're bent like this. That's not good either. You always want to store your brushes either bristles up or flat somewhere. And that way they'll last a good long time. And it's also respectful if you're sharing materials. Then people, when they go to use them, know that the materials will be in good shape for the next time they need to be used. Another tip, you never want to walk around with a paper plate with all this water on it, because on your way to the sink you might trip. And so just right here where you're working, just put it right back in there when you know you're finished working. Dump your puddles here, and then you can dispose of your paper plates and empty your water. Great! Well, leave your painting flat, and we're going to fill in all kinds of details when we get together next time in Lesson 4 of our Peaceful Sea. See you then.